This is Captain's Log with your host, Captain Mark Gray. Welcome aboard.
Sea tales are true stories that could save your life or that of a loved one. Next on Captain's Log.
Catalina yachts are time-tested and a sailor's choice, with over 50,000 boats made with pride in the USA. The nation's largest builder of sailboats invites you to call for free literature and a Catalina dealer in your area. Call 1-818-884-7700. Begin sailing your dream boat into reality today.
Catalina never ends.
My guest is Commodore Bill Eady of the Pacific Corinthian Yacht Club in Channel Islands, California. How are you doing, Bill?
Fine, Mark. Nice to see you.
Yeah, could you give us a brief boating history of your boating background?
Yeah, well, I've been on the water, mostly on lakes, back in upper New York State most of my life. But when I came out to California and got into boating about 10 years ago, we had a motor sailor, Cal 246, and then recently we went to power boating, and this is a Californian 48-foot power cruiser.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm unique, one of the few people that have, fortunately or unfortunately, two boats. This one, and I couldn't part with a Cal 246, so
sailboat.
So yeah, so maybe I'm unbiased.
Okay. How many years would you say you've been into boating all told?
Oh, I've been in boating since I was 16 years old.
Suffice to say, quite a while.
Yeah.
I understand you have a sea tale for us, a true story with a safety message. Could you tell us that?
Yes. When we were talking previously, Mark, trying to figure out what sea tale to tell, there's so many of them, most of them very good. Once in a while you have one that is a potential problem. There was one particular time when we were coming from San Diego up to Marina del Rey, and on the way into the harbor, the fog rolled in. We were still several miles away from the harbor. I mean, rolled in solid. And thinking about this, you know, in the past they didn't have the electronic navigation that they have today, like the Loran and the radar. And so I thought I'd talk about that. We used the radar to approach Marina del Rey, and but very slowly, because we were looking out primarily for other boats. In other words, we were using the radar for collision avoidance, although you could pick up the harbor also. But then when it came to get right into the harbor, I used the Loran. The Loran is a very, very accurate device, and the radar can fool you sometimes at high tide with the water breaking over the breakwater, and your sweep comes around just every so often, and you may miss some of the details, you know,
because your boat goes up and
your
down.
boat's going up and down. The waves, if the wave goes over the breakwater, you can't see the breakwater. So sometimes you're not exactly sure where the entrance is. But with the Loran, it is so accurate. If you use it in the proper mode, we don't have time to get into all the details, but you can come within 50 feet of the point that you're looking for.
The entrance to the harbor.
The entrance to the harbor. And then when you get in there close enough, then your radar will show you that entrance. So using the two together is a marvelous combination. So I wouldn't like sailboat versus powerboat. I wouldn't argue one versus the other. They each have their place.
Mm-hmm. What happened when you were coming in the fog, though? The little story end, is there more to that? Did you smash up on the breakwater, or you just got in safely using the electronics?
We did. It's always a little tense moment when you're getting that close to shore and you got some wave action, and when you make a decision to move in, you have to know that you're right, or the best thing is go back out to sea. Without going into a lot of details, which would take a long time. Well, one thing I might mention is that the modern Lorans give you either a time difference figures because you have 3 radio stations, and they give you the time difference between your position and 2 of them. And
so that's
in the modern,
how much time and how much distance that you have?
Well, no, that goes into the Loran, and the Loran figures out what your latitude and longitude is. But the Loran can be off by quarter or half a mile because of the computer problems and the fact that they're not dealing from the source information. Now you can switch the Loran onto actual time differences, which are what is plotted on your charts, just like latitude and longitude, except they're at different angles. And with the time difference, you can be much more accurate.
I understand that Loran has a limitation. Is it 500 miles or something?
Yes, the Loran stands for long distance radio navigation, and it's really not long distance at the time in today's terms. Today they have satellites, you can navigate all the way around the world. But when this was invented 30 or 40 years ago, 5, 6, 7, 800 miles was long distance. And for cruising up and down the coast, Loran is perfectly adequate. Of course, if you get down to Baja and below, you probably won't pick up any signals.
So I do have a friend that bought Loran for their boat, and they're very happy. And you know, it's quite expensive for some people. And they thought they could go all over the world with it. And I explained, you know, sat-nav. Could you tell us about sat-nav now that we know Loran is more or less for localized cruising and stuff?
I can tell you briefly, I don't have a sat-nav on here because we do not.
But just the difference so that people understand that using the satellite and stuff, how that works.
Yeah, well, of course, the satellites circle around the globe, and you have to be in a certain position. And a certain satellite comes by and you pick it up, but you may have some, as I understand, you may have some nulls in there where you actually don't get another fix, and then you're on, you know, your log and your compass. We'd still come back to the compass, any of this stuff. And
so
the Loran still gives you a compass heading, and you really should have yourself plotted on a chart and know what your compass heading is, and then monitor it with the Loran and take readings and plot them on the chart with the Loran, because the Loran is the one that's very accurate.
So when it breaks all down, though, the best tool still is the compass, dead reckoning, and of course celestial navigation. And needless to say, it takes quite a bit of training to acquire the basic good skills that you need to navigate.
Yes, celestial navigation you don't need unless you're going across an ocean someplace.
Yeah, cruising.
But up and down the coast here, the Loran, I feel, is much better than the sat-nav, because you turn it on and it keeps telling you, just like that, what your correct heading is, how far you are from your objective, how long it's going to take you to get there.
So what pieces of gear would you say would be excellent to have on any larger boat, you know, to where your visibility is lower perhaps or something?
I would say the argument between that you hear some people have between radar and Loran is really one of application. Depends on what you're doing. It's best really to have both of them. Even if you have to pick a smaller, less expensive set, one that gives you the fewer bells and whistles. You have the basic equipment, and you can do whatever, you can go with whichever way you need under any circumstance.
And of course, it's very important to know where you're at out there in the ocean.
And also with the big tankers out there, the Loran doesn't tell you about those. The only way you're going to pick those up if they're out of sight due to darkness or fog is through your radar.
So what if you're on, say, a small sailboat, little 20-footer, you know, you might not go out and spend money on Loran, radar, and all that. What would you say might be a good way to go there? A good navigational aid that's not terribly expensive.
Hand compass. And some flares, and a flashlight, and life jackets.
Above and beyond your regular compass, so you can take fixes on objects out there. And
well, on a small boat, I didn't know how small your boat was. Like
22, say.
Oh yeah, you need a compass on there. But it's a good idea to have a hand compass too, like if you have a lifeboat. And the lifeboat's not much good if you don't know which way to row. You know.
So it's good to have that with your safety gear at least, and as a backup. Well, I appreciate your coming on the show, and I look forward to seeing you again later.
Okay.
We'll be back right after this.
If you'd like to join the fun of owning a Bayliner, now's a great time to do it. Because right now, during your Bayliner dealer's Spring Fever sale, you can save a lot of money on the most popular boat in the water. Complete boat, motor, and trailer packages start as low as $52.95. The fun starts immediately. Bayliner.
I think it means feet. Ahoy there, mates. May I give you two a word of advice?
Skipper!
I spent many years on a deserted island, and one of the important things I learned is don't leave the harbor without knowing the boat or the rules of safe boating. You can learn them, too, by taking the free instruction sailboat course from the squadron. Here. The squadron won't leave you stranded.
next Seatails guest is Mr. Ben Reinhardt. He's past Commodore, Pacific Corinthian Yacht Club, also here in Channel Islands. Is that correct?
That's right.
And could you give us a little boating history on yourself?
I've had about 10 to 12 years of boating history. I've been a member both of the U.S. Power Squadron and also our yacht club here. I've taken a lot of courses on boating safety and boating skills. And I've had my own sailboat, a Catalina 30, that I've sailed in and around the islands here and done a lot of extensive sailing locally here only.
I understand you have a rather interesting sea tale, a true story with a safety message to it. Could you tell us about it?
Sure. I want to tell you why or how I won the Turkey Award of our local club. They give it out to the person on a regular basis who's done the most for boating unsafety practice.
And you're the recipient of that.
Oh, I'm the proud recipient of one of those awards. We call it the T Award, the Turkey Award. Each year we have, as part of our yacht club activities, an unpredictable, predictable log race. And what it consists of is a number of dinghies that go from dock to dock to dock, a regular scheduled program, and you're supposed to, in advance, estimate the amount of time it'll take you to complete the whole tour. At each dock you stay there for 2 minutes, and they welcome you with a can of beer, and they usually throw water at you and turn the hose on you, and it's a lot of fun.
And as you're leaving to set off on this, they throw water balloons at you?
Oh, absolutely. People line the shore and get all that kind of activity going. Well, one year my wife had asked to go with me in our dinghy for this particular race, and I had to turn it down because I had promised a male member of our club who had previously asked me. When I got to the starting line of the race, the fellow who was supposed to go with me didn't show up. And at the last moment, I needed somebody in the boat. My wife was back at our house, and this gay divorcee in the club said, "I'll go with you, Ben." And she jumped in my dinghy. She just didn't step in. And I was sitting on the floor of the dinghy. I had a gallon can of gasoline next to me. In case we ran out of gas during the race, I'd have more fuel.
Trying to be safe, you wanted
Oh,
a little extra
absolutely.
fuel.
I had studied all these things in all these courses, and I was 100% safety conscious. And as we started the race, they threw water at us, and I was sitting on the bottom, and as I reached the first dock, I started to feel very uncomfortable. I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because I had another woman in the boat with me or what. But as we reached the second dock, I started to squirm more and more. There was an intense pain in my groin area. I didn't realize that the gallon can of gasoline had fallen over on its side when this gay divorcee jumped in the boat. And the cap was loose, and I didn't realize that, and the gasoline was pouring slowly into the boat.
And you didn't notice it because all the water from the water balloons and all?
That's right. And when we reached the third dock, I was in excruciating pain. And I didn't want to touch the spot because I had this woman companion in the boat, this gay divorcee, and she'd probably think, what kind of a weirdo is this guy? And as I approached the third dock, there was my wife in the dock. And she saw me with this other woman, and you could see the fury in her eyes. And I was in intense pain, and I asked her to get me a change of underwear and a change of stockings and meet me at the next dock, dock number 4. She has an acute sense of smell, and she smelled the gasoline, and what she offered me instead was a match. I said no. So when we got to dock number 4, there she was with a change of clothing. I jumped out of the boat because there's about a 2-minute interval at each dock. I ran into that member's house, changed my clothing. When I got back, the female divorcee had left because she had seen the fury in my wife's eyes. And I changed my clothes and hosed out the dinghy and took off. And for 2 weeks, my wife didn't talk to me. And of course, I didn't win the race. I was disqualified because the divorcee had left. There are 3 things that I learned from that event. Shall I mention what they are?
Sure.
One is, the most important one is to always check any gasoline you have. cans, make sure the caps are tight, because as everybody knows, gasoline is an extremely dangerous fuel to have on a boat when it's not properly cared for. The second lesson I learned is never marry a jealous wife, and the third is never take a divorcee on a boat with you. It's a real boating hazard, and that's the story.
That's about it, huh? I think also a good tip might be, if you do have extra fuel in your boat, make sure it's secure, especially if you're using a vessel out in the ocean, not just a harbor, where it might flip over or something. You know, if it's not secure in there, you're going to lose it.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't realize is gasoline turns into a vapor and goes to the bottom or the lowest part of your boat, and it mixes with air, and it becomes a very volatile kind of mixture. And we have had incidents here in the harbor where boats have blown up at a fuel dock, taking on gasoline, and the gasoline vapor goes into the bottom of the boat, and when they turn their engine on, there's a spark and there's an explosion. We've had some serious accidents here in the harbor.
That's why they say that you should turn on your blowers down below in the bilge. They have these pumps for our non-boating friends that pump air out of the bilge and bring fresh air in to air it out for 5 minutes before you start your engine.
That's true. In my Catalina 30, that's the first thing you do, is to turn on your blowers, and you before anything else is done, and take at least 5 or 6 minutes for it to blow out. Did I say blow up? Blow out.
Before the boat blows up.
Particularly when you're refueling your boat at the regular fuel dock, you're supposed to close all your hatches and keep the vapors from getting into the boat itself. Mm-hmm. And even there's a danger. You should use your blower after you've had your boat refueled, even though there are boats behind you waiting to be fueled.
Yeah. I use the blower and keep it on while I'm running the engine at all times.
Yeah, no, you had a sailboat and a power boat.
Right.
So you've learned that lesson too. We study these courses, and yet sometimes it's difficult to put into practice, but it's important. Life is involved.
Well, I also know that it's important. A lot of people in these little dinghies don't realize that the fumes do sit down low, and so they think, well, I'm in an open air place, you know, and my fuel tank is down there and there's no problem. But and they'll have a cigarette or something while they're in the dinghy with their fuel tank there. So those points are extremely important.
My problem was it affected my whole groin area, and I was irritated more than one way.
I'm glad you're recovered. I do appreciate your being on the show, and we'll be back with another sea tale right after this. My next guest is Miss Sally Bond. She's also a member of Pacific Corinthian Yacht Club. And by the way, if you saw our last Sea Tales guest, she happens to be the gay divorcee that was in the dinghy with that man. How are you doing, Sally?
Fine, thank you.
I understand that you have a sea tale for us, a safety story.
Yes, I do.
Could you tell us that?
I could, but first of all, I want to tell you I'm a bride.
Oh, all right.
Just
now you're
got married.
Bride. That's fantastic.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a sea story about, I had been racing sailboats for approximately 15 years. And on a race, it was a Blue Water Series, we raced over to Santa Cruz Island, and we anchored down at an anchorage called Scorpion, Little Scorpion. And there were approximately 30 boats in the anchorage, which is fairly crowded because it's a small anchorage. And it was one of those really warm evenings, and at about 9 o'clock the wind just completely died, and it became very warm outside, and within a matter of about 10 minutes the wind picked up from the east, and a full-blown Santa Ana hit us, and the anchorage became just a big boiling mess in the matter of 5 minutes. And so since it was early in the evening, my son was playing cards with a group of teenagers on a boat that was right behind us. And so when the wind came up, our first maneuver was to get the anchor up. And we had to cut the anchor because the bow of the boat was going up and down.
Cut it loose, let it go?
And there was no way of getting to my son on the other boat.
Also, now you're without an anchor if you cut it loose.
That's right, it's gone. And so we got our engine started and we headed into the wind. We're on a range of 29. And so the waves in the ocean had picked up enormously because you have your normal swell, westerly swell, and then you have the east wind, and it was blowing between 60 and 70 knots. And so you had giant holes in the ocean. And so when you went up, you went way down, and it was really very rough sea. Anyhow,
Do you know how high the seas were, or approximately?
They were probably about 10-foot swells. And when we got away from the rocks in the island and started to head back, our main concern was our son on the other boat, because there was no way of getting to him. His boat was closer to the rocks than ours was. And so our concern was, well, if the boat goes ashore, perhaps he can get off the boat and it'll just break apart. And there were other teenage kids on the boat that didn't really know a lot about sailing, and the safety factor that they forgot was that they had their sail cover on the boom, they had a flopper stopper out, and they also had the engine off the stern, and they had it down below somewhere, and they had about 4 dinghies tied up around the boat.
So in no way could they, in a fast period of time, take off.
To do anything.
It'd take them quite a while to prepare.
And so what my son did first was to get life jackets on everyone, and then they got the main raised, and it took them...
The main sail for our non-boating friends out there.
And took them approximately an hour and a half to get away from the rocks. But during this period of time, we were heading back to Channel Islands Harbor, and we knew that they couldn't head right into it without an engine. And when we got back here, which is approximately 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, my husband stayed on the boat to see if the Coast Guard brought in any calls from my son. And I went home and waited for a phone call if perhaps somebody would call there. And so at about 7:30 the next morning, the phone rang, and it was my son. And he says, "Hi, Mom, guess where I am?" I said, "Well, either Hawaii or Santa Barbara." And he said Santa Barbara. And then he had described the incident of getting away from the rocks and the trauma involved, and said that it was very difficult. And when they couldn't face right into the wind towards Channel Islands, they kind of cracked off and headed up to Santa Barbara. And the closer they got to Santa Barbara, the more the wind died, and just kind of drifted into the harbor.
Well, there's a lucky incident for all involved.
Yeah, it had a happy ending.
Did you ever go back and get your anchors?
No.
Yeah. I understand there are a lot of them out there. That's
yes, there are.
You know, you can be looking at $500 easily and a couple of anchors in line. Of your chain. I think a good safety tip here, something to be learned, it would apply anywhere, but especially in the Channel Islands area with Santa Anas and all that, is the fact that within 10 minutes the weather can go from beautiful and calm, lake-like ocean, right up to 60-knot winds, and full-blown storm.
You have to be constantly ready to deal with Mother Nature out there.
And if that happens in 10 minutes, you have to be ready to make your decisions and move within 10 minutes, have your sails up, your engine going, safety gear on people. So it is something where you do want to be prepared at all times. Perhaps did you have a spare anchor on board? When you cut yours free, you weren't using your stern anchor or something?
We had the stern anchor out also, but we had to cut it also.
So
the main thing was to get away from the island.
Right. But should your engine quit, as you know, something like that with no anchors, you'd really be in a fix.
That's right.
And you'd probably end up smashing up on the rocks.
Well, it was in a life-saving situation, so you do what you had to do at the moment.
And that's a good point to make in boating. You always have to think ahead.
That's right.
If I cut my anchors, if my engine does quit, then I have to realize I'm there. Perhaps also, I think your son should have called you on the radio, made contact on the radio.
But they didn't have a radio on the boat.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I do appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much.
And thank you for coming.
All right.
And this has been Captain's Log. Please be safe out there and watch Captain's Log.